10 old house styles no longer built today. There was a time when walking through a neighborhood felt like flipping through the pages of an American storybook. Each home had a soul, a porch that invited conversation, windows that framed the sunrise, and rooftops that stood proudly against the sky. You didn't need a gate code to feel safe. You didn't need granite countertops to feel proud. The houses built back then were more than walls and wood. They were crafted by hand, designed to last, and meant to hold generations. Not just furniture, but somewhere along the way, that changed. Developments got faster, budgets got tighter, and homes started to lose the little things that made them feel human. Today, we're stepping back in time to remember 10 old house styles that were once a common sight across America, but are rarer, if ever, built today. These aren't just blueprints, they're memories. So settle in. Picture yourself walking past hedges that need trimming, screen doors that creak, and chimneys puffing smoke in the winter air. Let's begin. 1. Sears Kit Homes. The house that came in the mail. It's hard to imagine today, but from the early 1900s until the 1940s, you could open a Sears Roebuck & Co. catalog, flip past the dressers and pocket watches, and order an entire house, a real house. It arrived in a boxcar. All the lumber, nails, shingles, doors, windows, hardware, flooring, even the paint, pre-cut and labeled like a giant 3D puzzle. All you needed was a hammer, a set of hands, and a piece of land. These homes weren't throwaway builds. They were well-designed, sturdy, and surprisingly stylish, ranging from modest bungalows to elegant two-story colonials. Imagine building your first home with your father, nail by nail, watching it come to life, piece by piece. For many, a Sears Kit home was their first taste of ownership. Something no landlord could take, something their kids would grow up in, and their grandkids might remember decades later. Inside, you'd find solid oak, crim, clawfoot tubs, cast-iron sinks, and sometimes even built-in bookcases and breakfast nooks. They had character, and best of all, they were affordable. But by the 1940s, things began to change. Mass production shifted to suburban tract housing after World War II. Construction companies wanted speed, not charm. The Sears Kit homes faded into history. Today, if you're lucky, you might still stumble upon one. Maybe it's been painted over, remodeled, or added on to, but look closely, and you might still see the soul of a house that once arrived by train and stood the test of time. 2 log cabin revival homes, built like the old days, to remind us who we were. There's something deeply American about a log cabin. Long before the suburbs, long before steel beams and drywall, there were logs stacked by hand, chinked with mud or mortar, built not just to shelter but to last. And in the 1930s, during the Great Depression and into the 1940s and early 50s, there was a quiet return to that rustic charm. This wasn't just nostalgia. It was survival and pride. As the country clawed its way through hard times, many families, especially in the Appalachians, Midwest, and rural South, found themselves going back to basics, back to building with what was available, back to traditions that had worked for generations. The log cabin revival wasn't just about construction, it was about spirit. Thick wooden beams, often hewn right on the property, stacked tightly with care. Chimneys built from stone carried from creeks, porches built wide to catch a breeze on a summer night. No air conditioning, just open windows and the sound of crickets. Inside, you'd find knotty pine walls, maybe a hand-pump sink, and a wood-burning stove that was both heater and kitchen hearth. Winters were cold, but the cabin held in warmth like a hug, and in the evenings, families would gather near the fire, reading by lantern, telling stories that lingered long after the smoke cleared. These homes weren't made for show. They were made for quiet strength, for generations of wear, for children to run barefoot through creaky rooms, and for mothers to hang quilts across windows to keep the cold out. After World War II, America changed. Developments rolled in with promises of speed and shine. People wanted ranch homes, garages, asphalt driveways. Log cabins were too old-fashioned, too rustic, too hard to mass-produce, and so they began to vanish from new builds, preserved mostly as vacation homes, park lodges, or quiet country relics. But for those who grew up in them, or ever spent a single snowy night inside one, a log cabin wasn't just a house. It was a feeling of peace, of pride, of knowing that when the wind blew hard outside, you were warm, safe, and right where you belonged. 3. Shotgun houses straight through, front to back. No hallway, no secrets. If you ever walked down a quiet street in New Orleans, Memphis, or parts of Louisville, you might have seen them lined up like dominoes. Skinny, upright homes, close to the street, with tall front steps and porches, just big enough for 2 chairs and a glass of sweet tea. These were shotgun houses, one of the simplest and most iconic American home styles ever built. Their name came from the idea that you could fire a shotgun through the front door, and the bullet would fly clean out the back, passing through every room in a straight line without hitting a single wall. There were no hallways, just a front room, a middle room, a back room, maybe a fourth, squeezed in behind the kitchen. Each room opened directly into the next. They were born from necessity, compact, cheap to build, easy to heat, and perfectly sized for narrow city lots. After the Civil War, they became especially popular in southern cities and working-class neighborhoods, offering affordable housing in places where land was scarce and families were growing fast. But for all their simplicity, shotgun homes were full of life. The front porch was everything. A place to wave at neighbors, shell peas, or rock a baby to sleep while catching the breeze. Inside, the walls were thin, but the love was thick. You could hear Grandma's radio humming gospel in the front room, while cornbread sizzled in a cast-iron pan out back. People didn't have much space, but they had closeness, not just in square footage, but in family, faith, and community. And in some neighborhoods, color exploded off the wood siding. Pastel greens, mustard yellows, soft pinks. Many were hand-painted, repaired with love, passed down through generations. As time went on, though, the world grew taller and wider. City planners wanted driveways. People wanted privacy. Developers wanted uniformity. Shotgun houses began to disappear. Bulldozed for highways, abandoned during urban renewal, or simply outgrown in a world obsessed with more. Today, they survive in pockets, restored as guest houses, turned into artist homes, or clinging to their foundations as ghosts of another time. But if you ever walk by one, especially one with a porch swing still hanging, stop and listen. You might just hear the echoes of laughter, the screen door creaking, the soft shuffle of slippers on hardwood, reminding you that even the narrowest home can hold the widest kind of love. 4. Tudor Revival Homes. The home that made you believe in fairy tales, even in the suburbs, with their steep gables, arched doorways, and half-timbered exteriors. Tudor Revival homes looked like they had been plucked from a countryside in England and gently set down in the middle of small-town America. They were whimsical, dramatic, and just a little mysterious. The kind of homes that made children wonder if a secret passage was hiding behind a bookshelf, or if a grandmother's attic held dusty trunks and forgotten letters. These homes became popular in the 1920s and 30s, as Americans romanticized old-world charm and longed for homes that felt rooted in history. Inspired by medieval English cottages and manors, the Tudor revival wasn't just a house, it was a statement. A curved wooden door with iron hinges, tall narrow windows with leaded glass panes, chimneys with stone accents and patterned brickwork. And inside, warmth, exposed beams across the ceiling, cozy fireplaces built into stucco walls, and tiny breakfast nooks where sunlight streamed in like something out of a painting. These homes were often built in clusters, winding through early suburbs, nestled on tree-lined streets, or standing quietly on the edges of college towns and city parks. They didn't scream for attention, they whispered stories, but building them wasn't easy. That charm came with a cost. The handcrafted details, steep roof lines, and custom woodwork were expensive and labor-intensive. After World War II, as America turned to mass production and post-war efficiency, the Tudor revival fell out of fashion. It was replaced by ranch homes, split levels and square shapes with straight lines. Builders needed speed, families needed space, and suddenly there was no room in the budget for ornate chimneys and diamond-paned windows. Today Tudor revival homes are rare treasures, still standing proudly in older neighborhoods, often lovingly restored, and almost always admired. People still drive by them slowly. They take photos. They say things like, "It looks like something out of a movie," because it does, and maybe that's why we miss them. In a world filled with sameness, a Tudor revival reminded us that homes could still have a little magic, a little history, and a little bit of wonder in every corner. 5. American foursquare built to be practical, remembered because they lasted. If you ever drove through a small town and noticed a square two-story house with a wide front porch, a dormer window on top, and a symmetrical, no-nonsense look, you've likely seen a foursquare. Also known as the prairie box, the American foursquare was one of the most common home styles in early 20th century America, and for good reason. It was the answer to everything people needed after the excess of the Victorian era: clean lines, efficient layout, simple design, and most of all, reliability. With 4 rooms on the first floor and 4 rooms above, it gave families all the space they needed, without a single inch wasted. Living room, dining room, kitchen, and a parlor downstairs, bedrooms, and maybe a bathroom upstairs. Everything had its place. No frills, no fluff, just functionality wrapped in dignity. But the beauty of a foursquare wasn't just in its blueprint. It was in how people made it their own. The porch was wide enough to hold a swing, a few rocking chairs, and a pot of geraniums. The front steps were where fathers read the paper, mothers snapped beans, and children set up lemonade stands in summer. Inside, the wood trim was often oak, the doors solid, the floors squeaky with life. You could hear footsteps above, you could smell Sunday dinner from the parlor, and when someone knocked on the front door, you knew exactly where every family member was, because you could feel the rhythm of the house. These homes became the foundation of neighborhoods, often built side by side, each one similar but never quite the same. Some had bay windows, others had built-in china cabinets. Many were mail-order kits, arriving from Sears or Montgomery Ward. They were homes for teachers, factory workers, shopkeepers, and war veterans, built not to impress, but to last. And they did. Many still stand today, tucked into old tree-lined streets, sometimes modernized, but still unmistakably foursquare. So why did they fade? By the mid-20th century, home design shifted toward sprawling ranch homes and open floor plans. People wanted horizontal space instead of vertical. They wanted garages, family rooms, eat-in kitchens. The sturdy square lost its shine, but if you ever step into one, with its high ceilings and thick trim, you'll understand. The American foursquare wasn't just a house, it was a promise that something solid could still feel like home, and for many, it always will. 6. Italianate homes, where every window looked like a painting, and every roofline told a story. Imagine strolling down a quiet street in the 1800s, perhaps in a growing railroad town or a blossoming city like Cincinnati, Buffalo, or Chicago, and seeing a tall, narrow house with arched windows, a low-pitched roof, and wide, ornate brackets tucked beneath the eaves. You'd know right away. This was an Italianate home. Inspired by the romantic villas of the Italian countryside, this style became incredibly popular in the mid to late 19th century, especially for families who wanted something beautiful, proud, and just a little bit different. These homes stood tall and dignified. Their windows were often long and curved, with heavy decorative crowns above them. Their doors were arched or double-paneled, sometimes framed by columns or pillars, and their roofs, those low-sloped or flat-top roofs, were always bordered by large, carved brackets that looked almost too pretty to be real. Some were built from wood, others from brick, but no matter the material, they felt grand, even if they weren't very large. And the interiors, oh, they were full of charm. You'd often find 12-foot ceilings, elaborate plaster medallions on the ceiling where gas lights once hung, and wide staircases that curved ever so gently as they rose. The floors creaked just enough to remind you the house had a heartbeat. These homes were symbols of prosperity. Bankers lived in them, doctors, merchants. They weren't mansions, but they carried themselves like royalty. But over time, as with many romantic things, the Italianate fell out of favor. By the early 1900s, Americans were turning toward simpler lines, cleaner designs, and cheaper materials. The intricate details that once made these homes so magical were now seen as expensive and unnecessary. The houses were still standing, but no one was building new ones. Many were torn down. Others were chopped into apartments. Some were lost to fire, weather, or simply time, and with them, a certain kind of elegance disappeared from American neighborhoods. But once in a while, you still see one, hidden behind overgrown hedges, or restored to its former glory by someone who knew what they had. You stop, you look up at those windows, you run your eyes along the brackets under the roofline, and you think to yourself, they just don't build them like this anymore, because they don't. And maybe that's why we remember them, and why we should. 7. Folk Victorian homes, the house that smiled at you as you walked by. Folk Victorian homes didn't come from a palace blueprint. They didn't have grand ballrooms or dramatic towers. What they had was heart. These homes were born out of the simplest structures, farmhouses, cottages, and front-gabled homes, but dressed up with a little flair, a little color, and just enough decoration to make them feel special. It was the late 1800s, and something wonderful was happening in America. Railroads were crisscrossing the country. That meant decorative woodwork, once expensive and reserved for the wealthy, could now be shipped by train to rural towns and villages. Suddenly, even a modest carpenter could order spindle work for a porch, fretwork for a gable, or gingerbread trim for the eaves. And so, across the Midwest and South, across farm towns and crossroads communities, folk Victorian homes started to bloom like flowers. They weren't showy like Queen Agnes, or formal like Greek revivals, but they were warm, welcoming, and full of life. You'd walk past and see lace curtains in the window, a cat sleeping on a porch railing, a flag hanging from a white column. Inside, worn wooden floors, floral wallpaper, a ticking clock on the mantel, and the smell of fresh biscuits in the kitchen. These homes often had front porches with turned posts, bright painted doors, and shutters that actually opened and closed. No two were exactly alike, and that was part of the magic. They were homes built by people who wanted more than just shelter. They wanted beauty on a budget, and a little personality in every detail. But as the 20th century rolled on, architecture grew more modern, more horizontal, more flat, more plain. The scroll work was seen as fussy. The bright colors became old-fashioned, and the porches, they started disappearing altogether, replaced by garages, sliding glass doors, and privacy fences. Folk Victorian homes quietly vanished from new developments, and yet they still stand, scattered through old railroad towns and country roads, usually painted white now, with peeling trim and rocking chairs that haven't rocked in years. But if you've ever been lucky enough to live in one, or even just step inside, you'll understand. A Folk Victorian wasn't just a house, it was a hug, a pie cooling in the window, a place where neighbors waved, doors were left unlocked, and life moved just slow enough for you to notice the little things. 8. Mid-century butterfly roof homes, a house that looked like it could fly. If the 1950s had a signature flair, it was optimism. TVs looked like space helmets, and in some neighborhoods, particularly in sunny, forward-thinking places like California, Arizona, and Florida, homes got wings. The butterfly roof home was exactly what it sounded like. A bold, upside-down V shape, with the roof sloping inward instead of out. It gave the illusion that the house was about to take off. Sleek, light, and futuristic, these homes were part of the mid-century modern movement, where architects experimented with new shapes, open floor plans, and the idea that a house could feel like art. The butterfly roof allowed for tall walls of glass, dramatic lines, and an emphasis on light and space. From the street, they looked nothing like the bungalows or ranches of the past. They looked like they belonged on the cover of a science magazine. Inside, they felt open and airy. You might walk into a living room with floor-to-ceiling windows, a low brick fireplace, and furniture with thin wooden legs and pastel cushions. Some even had sunken living rooms and planters built into the walls. They were the future, and for a brief moment, they were the dream, especially for young professionals, architects, and creatives who wanted something different. But then came the problems. That dramatic inward slope, it collected water. Rain didn't run off. It pooled, and pooled roofs meant leaks, rot, and expensive repairs. Leaves clogged the gutters. Snow buildup was a nightmare. And let's face it, not everyone wanted their house to look like a spacecraft. By the late 1960s, most developers had moved on. Butterfly roofs were replaced by the safer, simpler ranch style, and few builders ever looked back. Today, butterfly roof homes are rare survivors, often tucked into old palm-lined suburbs, preserved by mid-century enthusiasts, or hidden behind updated facades. But when you do see one, it still stops you, still makes you smile, still whispers that for a little while, America believed the future was beautiful, and shaped like wings. 9. Carriage houses built for the horses, remembered for the charm. Long before the sound of engines filled the streets, cities and towns were alive with the soft clop of hooves and the rattle of wooden wheels. And behind many stately homes, or tucked away in alleyways in cobbled lanes, stood the carriage house. Originally, carriage houses were functional buildings. They stored horse-drawn carriages, feed, harnesses, and sometimes the horses themselves. But more than just a barn or shed, these buildings were often built with care. designed to match the main home, crafted with arched doors, dormer windows, and brick or wood siding that felt less like storage, and more like a miniature home. Sometimes there was a coachman's apartment upstairs, just a single room with a stove, a bed, and a narrow window looking over the alley. Simple, but warm. Other times, the loft was used for hay or supplies, and the ground floor held the carriages in neat rows. And when automobiles came around, the carriage house adapted briefly. Some were used to store early cars, their wide doors perfectly suited for a Model T. Others were converted into guest cottages, artist studios, or rental apartments. In urban areas, they became tiny homes with big history, hidden gems nestled between mansions and modern homes. But by the mid-20th century, most were gone, torn down to make way for driveways, garages, and housing developments. Zoning laws, suburban sprawl, and the loss of large backyards pushed them out. Today, a surviving carriage house feels like a secret. It might be behind an old Victorian with ivy crawling up its sides, or maybe it has been renovated, turned into a cozy guest house with exposed beams and creaky floors. But no matter how it's used, it still carries the air of another time. A time when people knew their horses by name, when someone lit lanterns by hand, when craftsmanship was given, even to the buildings behind the home. And maybe that's why we miss them, because the carriage house wasn't just a structure, it was a symbol of quiet dignity, of useful beauty, and of an age when even the most practical things were built to last. 10 Queen Anne Victorians. Like living inside a storybook, one turret, one porch, one dream at a time. If ever there was a house that felt like a fairy tale, it was the Queen Anne Victorian. You couldn't miss them, with their whimsical towers, lace-like trim, and bright, joyful colors. These homes didn't just sit quietly on a block. They announced themselves. Built in the late 1800s, during a period of industrial innovation and artistic expression, Queen Agnes were the architectural version of a celebration. Every part of them, from the sweeping porches, to the stained glass windows, to the decorative gables, was meant to delight the eye. Some had turrets that looked like castle towers. Others had wraparound porches with gingerbread spindles so delicate they looked like they were carved from icing. Rooflines twisted and turned, colors danced across the siding, and no two were exactly alike. Inside, it was just as magical. Grand staircases, pocket doors, parlor rooms, and ornate mantels, floral wallpaper curled at the corners, chandeliers hung from high ceilings. There was a room for everything. Music, sewing, tea. Even if those rooms were no larger than a walk-in closet today, they were often the pride of a neighborhood, commissioned by wealthy families or local business owners, and yet somehow they always felt warm, lived in. You could imagine a family gathered on Christmas morning, or a child peeking through a window from the curved tower bedroom. But they were expensive, not just to build, but to maintain, and so, with time, they faded. Modern homes became more practical, more minimal. Builders stopped using wood trim, people stopped wanting parlors and towers. Many Queen Agnes were torn down, others were chopped into apartments or left to fall into disrepair. Still, those that remain, whether fully restored or gently fading, continue to turn heads. People still stop their cars to look, still take photos, still wonder what it would feel like to live in a house that beautiful, that full of character, that alive. Because Queen Anne's weren't just houses, they were works of art, and in many ways, they still are. There was a time when homes didn't all look the same. When neighborhoods were stitched together like quilts, every square different, every thread personal. Porches creaked, windows opened outward. Front doors had character, and behind every one of them was a family, cooking, laughing, building a life one ordinary day at a time. Today, we build faster, we build cheaper, but in doing so, we've left behind a little something that can't be replaced. So if you're lucky enough to live near one of these old house styles, take a walk, look up, breathe it in, because what you're seeing isn't just architecture, it's American history, standing tall in wood and stone and memory. Which of these homes did you grow up in, or wish you had? Let us know in the comments. And if this trip down memory lane brought back some feelings, warm ones, quiet ones, even bittersweet, don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us again as we keep remembering the pieces of everyday life that have faded into history.